Christmas Eve, 1887. Thornton Depot, Montana Territory, 8 o'clock and 12 below zero. Ruth Mercer stepped off the Union Pacific into wind that cut like broken glass. Coal smoke from the depot stove mixed with the steam hiss of the departing locomotive. Her breath clouded white in the lamplight. The platform emptied fast. Families, freight workers, cattlemen, all with destinations, all with someone waiting. She stood alone. No Thomas Hadley, no fiancé, no future. The depot master appeared in the doorway, gray-bearded and cold-eyed. Virgil Thorne. He held a crumpled telegram like a weapon. "Hadley ain't coming, miss. Changed his mind. Found another." Thorne's voice carried no sympathy. "Don't wait." Ruth's teaching contract trembled in her gloved hands. Thorne glanced at it, chuckled low. "School board never authorized hiring. Someone sold you a lie." And she opened her reticule. Counted coins in the lamplight. $3.47. Thorne stepped back inside, paused at the threshold. "Ma'am, your trunk with the rest of your belongings?" His smile was thin as January ice. "Already gone." Here Ruth's fingers went numb inside her gloves. The platform boards creaked under her boots as other passengers dispersed into the night. A woman with 2 children climbed into a waiting buggy. A cattleman threw his saddle over a roan's back and rode north. The freight workers loaded the last crates onto wagons and left. She was the only one standing still. Thorne watched from the depot doorway, arms crossed, waiting for her to leave, waiting for her to become someone else's problem. The wind picked up. Ruth's coat was quality wool, bought 3 years ago when her mother was still alive, and money still mattered less than it should have. Now it was all she owned. That and a carpet bag with 2 dresses, a Bible, and a teaching certificate that meant nothing. She counted the coins again. $3.47, enough for maybe 3 nights in a boarding house if she didn't eat. A freight wagon rolled toward the platform, pulled by 2 heavy draft horses. The driver was broad-shouldered, maybe late 30s, wearing a canvas coat and a flat-brimmed hat crusted with snow. He set the brake and climbed down, boots hitting the boards with solid weight. He moved past Ruth toward a stack of crates marked for loading. She caught the smell of horses and cold leather and tobacco. He worked methodically, lifting each crate with the ease of long practice. Thorne stepped out of the depot. "Cormac, that's the last load. Get it done and get gone. Storm's coming in hard." The man called Cormac nodded. "Yes, sir." But his eyes slid to Ruth, held there a moment. Thorne's voice sharpened. "She ain't your concern?" Cormac loaded another crate, said nothing. Ruth turned away, faced the empty road that led into town. A quarter-mile of darkness and cold. She picked up her carpet bag. "Ma'am?" She stopped, turned. Cormac stood beside his wagon, one hand on the sideboard. "You got somewhere to go?" Ruth's throat closed. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Thorne's voice cut from the depot doorway. "I said she ain't your concern, Silas." Silas Cormac looked at Thorne, looked back at Ruth. Something in his weathered face shifted. Decision made. "I know a place," he said quietly. "Safe and proper. Mother runs a boarding house. Room and meals. She'll see you right." Ruth found her voice. It came out smaller than she wanted. "I can't pay. Not yet. Mother'll work something out." He gestured to the wagon bench. "Storm's near. You'll freeze if you stay here." Thorne stepped off the depot platform. "Cormac, you're interfering with railroad business." She ain't railroad business. She's a person in trouble." Silas met the older man's stare without flinching. "I'm offering help, that's all." The wind moaned through the telegraph wires overhead. Ruth looked at the dark road, then at the wagon, then at Silas Cormac's face. She saw no leer there, no calculation, just a tired man doing what he figured was right. She climbed onto the wagon bench. Silas swung up beside her, released the brake, and clucked to the horses. They pulled forward into the darkness. Behind them, Thorne stood in the lamplight, watching. As they turned onto the main road, Ruth glanced back. Thorne had gone inside. Through the depot window, she saw him feeding papers into the cast-iron stove. Flames leaped, telegraph headers visible for just a moment before burning black. The wagon moved through snow that fell in thick curtains. Ruth pulled her coat tighter. Silas said nothing for the first mile. The only sounds were harness creak, hoof fall on frozen ground, wind cutting through bare cottonwoods. Finally, he spoke. "Name's Silas Cormac, freight contractor. Haul for the railroad and local merchants." "Ruth Mercer." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Where are you from, Miss Mercer?" "Ohio. Columbus." "Long way?" "Yes." Another silence. Then, "Man who was supposed to meet you. That was personal business?" Ruth nodded. Couldn't speak past the humiliation. Silas clucked to the horses. "His loss, then." She looked at him sharply. He kept his eyes on the road. A 2-story frame house materialized from the snow, lamplight glowing in the windows like promises. Silas pulled the wagon to the front porch. Before he could help Ruth down, The door opened. A woman appeared, gray hair pinned tight, shawl wrapped around narrow shoulders. 60-some years old, with sharp eyes that took in the whole scene in 3 seconds. Silas. Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 questions compressed into his name. Found her at the depot, Ma. Storm coming, she needs shelter. The woman, his mother, stepped aside immediately. Then get her in out of that cold. Don't stand there explaining when there's doing to be done. The house wrapped around Ruth like a quilt. Polished wood floors, a cast iron stove. Radiating heat. The smell of bread and coffee and something with cinnamon. A Christmas wreath hung on the parlor mantel. Home. It smelled like home. Ruth's knees went weak. Esther Cormack caught her elbow. Sit, child. Sit before you fall. Ruth sank into a kitchen chair. Esther poured coffee without asking, pressed the warm cup into Ruth's shaking hands. Silas stood by the stove, hat in hands, snow melting from his shoulders. She got a name? Esther asked. Ruth Mercer, from Ohio. Why was she standing alone at the depot on Christmas Eve? Ruth spoke before Silas could answer. I came to teach, and to marry. But the teaching position doesn't exist, and the man changed his mind. The words came out flat. Facts, not feelings. Safer that way. Esther's expression didn't change. I see. She opened a drawer, pulled out a leather-bound ledger, set it on the table, retrieved a pen and inkwell, opened to a fresh page. Her handwriting was meticulous, every letter formed with care. December 24th, 1887. R. Mercer, room 3, 12 Fools, month boarding, credit extended 30 days. She looked up, met Ruth's eyes. You got till January 24th to find that money, child. Her voice softened just slightly. After that, we'll see. Ruth woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For 3 seconds, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The depot, the telegram, $3.47. She dressed in her second dress, the navy one with simple trim, descended the stairs slowly. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Can't just take in strays, Ma. Silas's voice, low and uncertain. She ain't a stray. She's a woman in need. There's a difference. Thorne won't like it. Virgil Thorne can take his opinions to the devil. Ruth paused in the hallway. The floorboard creaked under her foot. The conversation stopped. She stepped into the kitchen. Esther stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. Silas sat at the table, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Both looked at her. Morning, child. Esther's voice was brisk, matter-of-fact. You eat eggs? Yes, ma'am. Then set the table. 3 plates, forks, knives. Cups are in the cupboard. Ruth moved to obey. Her hands knew the work. 6 months of nursing her mother through consumption had taught her kitchens and sick rooms and the small rituals of survival. Esther served breakfast without ceremony. Bacon, eggs, biscuits, preserves. More food than Ruth had seen in a single meal since August. Silas said grace. Simple words, genuine faith. When he finished, Esther passed the biscuits. Storm's settling in, she said. Roads won't clear for 3 days, maybe 4. You're welcome here until they do. Ruth's throat tightened. Mrs. Cormack, I can't impose. You're not imposing. You're accepting hospitality. Esther's eyes were sharp but not unkind. Eat. You're thin as a fence post. Over breakfast, Ruth learned about Thornton. 300 people, maybe 350. 1 school, already staffed by a widow from Helena. 2 churches, Methodist and Catholic. Railroad depot, the center of commerce. Freight came through twice weekly. Stagecoach on Saturdays. Town's tight, Esther said. Everybody knows everybody's business before they know it themselves. Church ladies run things through gossip. Merchants run things through the railroad. And Virgil Thorne? Ruth asked quietly. Silas and Esther exchanged glances. Thorne runs the depot, Silas said, which means he controls freight, telegraph, and most of the information that moves through this valley. Man's got reach. Ruth set down her fork. Last night, when we left, I saw him burning papers. Silas went still. You sure? Telegraph headers. I saw them before the flames took them. Esther's mouth thinned. That man's got secrets deeper than the Yellowstone in spring. After breakfast, Ruth insisted on helping with dishes. The hot water and lye soap felt good on her hands. Real. Useful. Through the kitchen window, she watched snow fall in heavy sheets. Silas pulled on his coat. Got to check on the ranch. Stock'll need feeding. You live here? Ruth asked. Got a cabin 5 miles north, but Ma's cooking's better than mine, so I eat here when I can. He settled his hat. Miss Mercer, you mentioned you came for a teaching position? Yes, but Miss Thorne said, Thorne says a lot of things. Might be worth checking with the school board directly, and... He hesitated. You mentioned your mother. She passed recently? Ruth's hand stilled in the dishwater. August. Consumption. I'm sorry. He cleared his throat. She leave you anything? Land, maybe? Inheritance? Ruth dried her hands on a towel. She filed a homestead claim 2 years ago, Montana Territory, quarter section north of town. I have the papers. Had them. They were in my trunk. Silas's expression shifted, something sharp and sudden. Which trunk? The one Thorne said was lost. He exchanged another look with Esther, this one longer, more weighted. Miss Mercer, Silas said carefully, might be smart to visit the land office. Check on that claim, make sure everything's in order. The land office occupied a single room above the general store. Ruth climbed the stairs alone. Esther had insisted on lending her a warmer shawl. The wool smelled like cedar and old lavender. The clerk was young, maybe 25, with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes. He pulled the file when Ruth gave her mother's name. Martha Mercer, quarter section, Township 12 North, Range 8 East, filed March 1885. Yes, ma'am, we have the record. The clerk laid out the papers. But there's been a recent transfer. Ruth leaned forward. Transfer? Deed was signed over 3 weeks ago, legal and binding. He pointed to a signature at the bottom of a form. See here? Martha Mercer's mark. Witnessed and notarized. Ruth stared at the signature. It looked like her mother's hand. Almost. But the ink was wrong. Too dark. And the date? This is dated October 15th. Yes, ma'am. My mother died August 23rd. The clerk went pale. He picked up the paper, examined it closely. His hand started to shake. I didn't process this transfer. Mr. Thorne brought it in. Said he'd bought the claim from your cousin executor, Thomas Hadley. The name hit Ruth like a fist. Thomas Hadley, her fiancé, the man who'd written her love letters for 6 months, who'd promised marriage and a teaching position and a new life in Montana. Thomas Hadley. The room tilted. Ruth gripped the edge of the desk. Where is this Thomas Hadley? Her voice came from somewhere far away. I don't rightly know, ma'am. He only came to town the once, signed the papers and left. Ruth forced her mind to work. What did he look like? Young fellow, maybe 30. Dark hair, clean-shaven, spoke real educated. Did he mention his relationship to Mr. Thorne? The clerk blinked. Well, yes, ma'am, said Thorne was his uncle. That's why. Ruth didn't hear the rest. The pieces fell together like a deadfall trap snapping shut. Thomas Hadley was Thorne's nephew. The engagement was a lie. The teaching position was bait. They'd lured her west so they could forge her mother's signature and steal the land claim. Everything. All of it. A scheme from the beginning. Ruth found Thorne at the depot, sorting mail. She walked through the door and stood in front of his desk. He looked up, smiled that thin smile. Miss Mercer, decided to move on? You stole my mother's land. His smile didn't waver. That's a serious accusation. Thomas Hadley is your nephew. So? The entire engagement was a fraud. You lured me here so you could steal the deed from my trunk and forge a transfer. Thorne leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked. Outside, wind rattled the depot windows. Prove it, he said simply. Ruth's hands clenched into fists. The signature is forged. My mother died in August. This is dated October. Then take it to a judge. Thorne's voice was mild, reasonable. File a complaint, contest the transfer, that's your legal right. I will. You do that. And he stood, walked to the window, looked out at the snow. But Miss Mercer, understand something. I'm the depot master for the Union Pacific Railroad. I've got contracts, connections, and the trust of every merchant in this valley. You're a single woman, traveling alone, abandoned by your fiancé, with no money and no prospects. He turned to face her. Who do you think a federal judge will believe? The railroad man with 20 years of service? Or the desperate woman making wild claims about forgery? The truth of it struck Ruth like a physical blow. Your word, Thorne continued softly, is worth exactly nothing. The cast-iron stove ticked in the silence. Coal smoke drifted through the room. Ruth's breath came shallow and fast. Now, Thorne said, I suggest you take whatever charity Mrs. Cormac's offering and find your way back east. Montana Territory ain't kind to women who make trouble. He sat back down at his desk, picked up a piece of mail, dismissed her without another word. Ruth walked out into the snow. Her legs moved on their own, carried her back toward the boarding house, through white, that fell and buried everything. The law itself was closed against her. Thorne owned the railroad, the depot, the trust of the community. She owned nothing but the truth. And truth, it turned out, needed witnesses with power. She had neither. Ruth told Esther everything that night, the forged signature, Thomas Hadley's connection to Thorne, the land stolen through deliberate conspiracy. Esther listened without interrupting. When Ruth finished, the older woman sat quiet for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Wind rattled the window frames. So you got no money, no land, no teaching position, and no legal standing. Esther's voice was matter-of-fact. That sum it up? Yes, ma'am. And what do you aim to do about it? Ruth looked at her hands, rough from 6 months of nursing, thin from skipped meals. I don't know. Well, Esther stood, moved to the stove, poured 2 cups of coffee. First thing is you stop feeling sorry for yourself. Second thing is you figure out what you can do, not what you can't. She set a cup in front of Ruth. You said you're a teacher. That true, or was it part of the lie? It's true. I taught primary school in Columbus for 3 years. Then teach. There's no position. I got 3 children boarding here. Miners' families, saving up for homesteads. Those children need teaching, and their parents can't pay much, but they can pay something. You teach them, you earn your keep, and you build something that's yours. Ruth stared at the coffee. Steam rose in the lamplight. Why are you helping me? Esther's face softened just slightly. My daughter was a teacher, Sarah, died of cholera 10 years ago, working at a mining camp school. She was 26, your age. The silence held weight. I couldn't help her. Esther's voice stayed steady. Maybe I can help you. The next morning, Ruth met the children. 2 boys, 8 and 10, and a girl of 6. Their parents worked claims north of town, boarding at Esther's during the winter when the mines ran short-handed. Ruth set up a makeshift classroom in the parlor, borrowed slates and chalk from the general store on credit, started with reading primers and basic arithmetic. The children were hungry for learning. The little girl, Molly, traced letters with fierce concentration. The older boy, James, asked questions about everything. Why rivers froze, how railroads worked, what made mountains. Ruth taught, and something inside her unlocked. This she knew, this she could do. Through the window, she caught movement. Virgil Thorne stood across the street, watching. He met her eyes, tipped his hat in mock courtesy, then turned and walked back toward the depot. Message clear, I'm watching you. Sunday arrived cold and bright. Esther insisted Ruth attend church. You want respect in this town? You show up where respect gets measured. The Methodist church was simple white clapboard, packed with families. Ruth felt every eye track her as she followed Esther down the aisle. Whispers rose like steam. That's the one. Staying at the boarding house with Silas. No husband, no family. Just appeared. Ruth kept her chin up, sat beside Esther in the 3rd pew. Silas arrived late, slid into the pew behind them. His presence felt solid at her back. Reverend Knox. Preached on charity. Ruth barely heard the words. She was too aware of the stares, the whispers behind gloved hands, the judgment settling over her like frost. After the service, the congregation filed out onto the church steps. January sun cut sharp and bright across the snow. Ruth moved to leave quickly, but a woman blocked her path. Mrs. Dalton, banker's wife, 50-some years old, dressed in Sunday finery. Miss Mercer, her voice carried across the steps, intentionally loud. I understand you're teaching children at the boarding house. Yes, ma'am. Without certification from the territorial board? Ruth's throat tightened. I have teaching credentials from Ohio. Ohio isn't Montana. Mrs. Dalton's smile was thin. And I must say, your living situation raises questions. A single woman residing in a household with an unmarried man. Silas don't live there. Esther's voice cut like an axe through pine. He's got a ranch cabin 5 miles north. Visits for meals and Sunday, same as always. Ruth's got her own room with a lock on the door, and I'm in residence as chaperone every minute. Mrs. Dalton's smile tightened. Still, the appearance, Esther said loudly, is that a woman in need received Christian charity on Christmas Eve. The appearance is that she's teaching our children for pennies, while the rest of us gossip on church steps. The appearance, Margaret, is that you're more concerned with scandal than with mercy. Silence fell across the steps. 30 people stood frozen, watching. Mrs. Dalton's face flushed red. Well, I never... Yes, you have. Many times. Esther stepped closer. This woman's done nothing but survive what men did to her. She sleeps in a proper boarding house, teaches children for free, and minds her own business. You got complaints about that? Take them to God. But don't stand here on the steps of his house and pretend judgment is righteousness. Reverend Knox appeared in the doorway behind them. Mrs. Cormack speaks wisely. We're called to love our neighbors, not prosecute them. He looked directly at Mrs. Dalton. Miss Mercer is welcome here, as are all who seek God's grace. The tension broke slowly. People began moving down the steps, Conversations resuming in lower tones, Mrs. Dalton walked away stiffly, trailing sympathizers. But others, younger families, working men, a few merchants, nodded to Ruth, small gestures, acknowledgement. Walking back to the boarding house, Silas fell into step beside them. That took courage, Ma. It took truth, Esther corrected. Courage is just truth spoken out loud. They walked in silence for a block. Then Silas spoke quietly. Miss Mercer, you mentioned your trunk was lost, that it contained your mother's homestead deed. Yes. I haul freight for Thorne's Depot. Railroad regulation requires we keep carbon copies of every manifest. Every delivery, every piece lost or damaged, there's a record. Ruth stopped walking, looked at him. If your trunk was truly lost in transit, Silas continued, there'll be documentation. But if it arrived and then disappeared, he met her eyes. That's a different story. Well, can you check? Already did, last night. Couldn't sleep, so I went through my files. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, handed it to Ruth. The manifest was dated December 24th, 1887. One trunk marked R. Mercer, Columbus, Ohio. Destination, Thornton Depot. At the bottom, a signature. Received by V. Thorne, Depot Master. Ruth's hands trembled. He signed for it. Yes, ma'am, which means your trunk wasn't lost. It was received, and then it disappeared. The implications unfolded like a map, evidence, documentation, proof. Esther studied the manifest. This is good, but it's just one piece. If we're going to challenge Thorne, we need more. A pattern, something that shows this wasn't an accident. I keep 2 years of carbons, Silas said slowly. Railroad requires it for insurance claims. If Thorne's been doing this to others... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Ruth looked at the manifest, then at Silas, then at Esther. 3 people standing on a frozen street in winter sunlight. 3 people with nothing but a piece of paper and the willingness to look closer. How long would it take to go through 2 years of files? Ruth asked. Week, maybe, if I know what I'm looking for. Single women, Ruth said. Traveling alone. Homestead claimants. Trunks marked lost or damaged. Silas nodded slowly. I'll start tonight. They walked on. The boarding house appeared ahead, smoke rising straight from the chimney in the still air. Ruth felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, something harder, more useful, purpose. She'd been a victim at the depot on Christmas Eve, standing on the church steps she'd been defended. Now, walking toward Esther's kitchen with a manifest in her hand, she was something else entirely. She was a woman with evidence. And evidence, unlike words, couldn't be dismissed. January crept forward, cold and slow. Ruth taught the children every morning. Afternoons, she helped Esther with laundry and cooking, earning her keep in work if not coin. Evenings, Silas arrived with another stack of manifests. They spread the papers across the kitchen table by lamplight. Ruth learned to read freight codes, recognize patterns in delivery records, ink-stained fingers, coffee going cold, the scratch of pen on paper as they logged each suspicious entry. By January 18th, they'd found 4 more, 4 women traveling alone, 4 trunks marked lost or damaged beyond recovery, 4 homestead claims transferred within 6 months. Not enough to prove conspiracy, enough to raise questions. That afternoon, Silas returned to the depot, told Thorne he needed to check storage for a missing shipment. Thorne waved him through without interest, busy with telegraph business. Silas found Ruth's trunk in the back corner, covered with a tarp, hidden, but not well enough. He brought it to the boarding house in his wagon after dark. Ruth stood in the kitchen, staring at her own trunk like it was a coffin. The lock was pried open, metal bent and twisted. Someone had used a crowbar, hasty and violent. I'll leave you, Silas said quietly. If you want privacy, stay. Ruth's voice came out harder than she intended. Please, I need a witness. She lifted the lid. The smell hit her first. Her mother's lavender sachets, the scent of home and dying, and 6 months of grief compressed into a single breath. Ruth's knees buckled. Esther caught her elbow, steadied her. Inside, her mother's clothes were rifled through, but mostly intact. The black mourning dress, the shawl Ruth had mended 100 times, a Bible with family records written in her mother's careful hand. Ruth lifted each item with shaking hands, set them aside. Searched deeper. The deed envelope was there. Torn open, empty. Ruth had expected that. Still, seeing it, the powder burns along the edge where it had been opened near a lamp flame in haste, made rage, spike, hot through her chest. She kept searching, found her own letters home. The teaching primers she'd packed, her mother's sewing kit, then her hand closed on something small, wrapped in cloth, at the very bottom. She pulled it out, unwrapped it slowly, empty. The cloth had held her mother's wedding ring. Ruth had sold it December 28th to the assayer. Used the money for her first boarding payment. $12 that bought her 30 days of survival, except the ring had never been hers to sell. Thorne had taken it from the trunk before Ruth ever saw it. She'd sold it to the assayer, and the assayer had sold it to... Who bought my mother's ring? Ruth looked at Silas. The assayer would have records. Silas's face had gone very still. I bought it. Silence. Complete silence. Ruth stared at him. You? January 10th. Soon as I heard you'd sold it. His voice was rough. Figured you'd want it back someday. Figured I'd keep it safe until... He stopped, looked away. Until what? Ruth whispered. Until you had cause to wear it again. The kitchen clock ticked. Esther made herself busy at the stove, giving them space without leaving. Ruth's throat burned. How much did you pay? Don't matter. How much? $15. 3 months' wages, near enough. Some thefts go beyond money, some kindnesses do too. Ruth couldn't speak. Could only stand there holding the empty cloth while tears ran hot down her cold face. The next morning, Marshal Creedy arrived at the boarding house. He was 40, thick-necked, with a railroad union pin on his vest. He stood on the porch with a paper in his hand and something like embarrassment in his eyes. Mrs. Cormack, got a complaint here. Official business. Esther dried her hands on her apron. What kind of complaint? Moral complaint. Says you're housing an unmarried woman in cohabitation with an unmarried man. Violation of territorial decency standards. Silas don't live here. Complaint says he's here regular. Meals, evenings, overnight sometimes. He sleeps in his cabin 5 miles north. You can ride out and check his bed if you need proof it's being used. Creedy shifted his weight. Mrs. Cormack, I'm just delivering the complaint. Territorial prosecutor will decide what to do with it. But you should know, complaints like this, they tend to affect business. Boarding houses need good reputations. Who filed it? Esther's voice went cold. Can't say. Anonymous. Can't or won't. Creedy met her eyes, said nothing. That was answer enough. He tipped his hat and left. By afternoon, 3 families had withdrawn their children from Ruth's teaching. Came to the door one by one, apologetic but firm. Nothing personal, Miss Mercer, but we can't have our children taught by someone with questions about her character. We're sure it's all proper, but appearances matter. Maybe when things settle down... They left money for the week's teaching they'd already received. Ruth set the coins on the table and didn't touch them again. That evening, she walked to the general store, asked to send a telegram to the Territorial Education Board in Helena, explain the situation, request guidance. The telegraph operator was young, maybe 20. He listened to her message, nodded along, then set down his pencil. Can't send that, ma'am. Why not? Policy. Mr. Thorne says all territorial government communications got to go through him. For approval, railroad security. That's not legal. It's depot policy, ma'am. You want to argue it, take it up with Mr. Thorne. Ruth walked back to the boarding house, through cold that bit at her face and hands. Her breath clouded white. Her feet left tracks in snow that would be covered by morning. At the boarding house door, she found Virgil Thorne waiting. He stood on the porch, casual as Sunday, held out an envelope. Miss Mercer, thought you might like a way out of your troubles. Ruth didn't take the envelope. Thorne opened it himself, showed her the contents, 5 $10 bills, $50. Enough for train fare east and a few months' rent. Fresh start, no questions asked. No. Be reasonable. You got no teaching position, no land, no prospects. The marshal's complaint will make things harder. And even if you fight, who's going to believe you? He tucked the money back in the envelope, set it on the porch railing. Offer stands till February 1st. After that, he shrugged. Winter gets colder. He walked away, boots crunching on snow, disappeared into the darkness toward the depot. Ruth stood alone on the porch. The envelope sat on the railing like a snake. Inside, the boarding house was warm, lamplight, coffee smell, safety purchased with Esther's charity and Silas's wages. But January 24th had arrived. Her 30 days were up. She had no money, no teaching income now, no legal recourse. The marshal was bought. The telegraph was blocked. The deed was forged and validated. And in 6 weeks, if she couldn't prove 90 continuous days of residency, even the possibility of fighting would be gone. She picked up the envelope, held it, felt the weight of $50. Enough to run, not enough to win. Ruth tore the envelope in half, then quarters, let the pieces fall into the snow where wind scattered them like ash. The law had teeth. Every single one was in Thorne's mouth. But giving up meant he'd already won. And Ruth wasn't done fighting yet. That night, Ruth packed her carpet bag. She did it slowly, folding each dress with care, the navy one. The gray one she'd worn to her mother's funeral. She wrapped her Bible in her spare shawl, set her teaching primers on top. Everything she owned fit in one bag. Still, Esther found her sitting on the bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the packed bag like it held answers. Child. Esther's voice was soft. What are you doing? I can't let you lose your boarding house reputation over me. The marshal's complaint, families are already pulling their children. If I stay, you'll lose business, lose everything you've built. So you'll run. I'll leave before I cause more damage. Esther sat on the bed beside her. The old frame creaked. Outside, wind rattled the window. But beneath the wind, another sound, water dripping from the eaves, first hint of thaw. My reputation, Esther said quietly, survived bearing a husband and a daughter. It'll survive the truth. She pulled the leather ledger from her apron pocket, set it on the bed between them. Look. Ruth opened the ledger. Esther's handwriting filled the pages. Every entry dated, detailed, meticulous. December 24th, 1887. Mercer, room 3, $12 a month boarding, credit extended, December 25th. Breakfast served, dishes washed. Linens changed December 26th. Teaching services rendered, 3 children, no charge, on and on, every day. Every meal, every task completed. Every morning Ruth woke in room 3, and every night she slept there. Esther pointed to the latest entry. January 24th, 1888, 31 days, continuous residence. Territory homestead law, Esther said, requires 90 continuous days of residency with documented proof to establish claim. You got 31 days in this ledger, dated, witnessed by me, legal. Ruth's breath caught. 90 days? 90 days living on the land you're claiming. But the law allows substitute proof if the land's not yet habitable. Boarding house, residency, in the same township counts. I checked with Reverend Knox. He knows the law. Ruth did the math. 31 days down, 59 to go, February, March, half of April. But if I leave now, then those 31 days mean nothing. You start over somewhere else with nothing. Esther's eyes were fierce. Or you stay, you fight, and in 59 more days, you'll have legal standing no judge can dismiss. If I can survive 59 days, if we can survive them, Esther squeezed Ruth's hand. I ain't in this alone anymore. Neither are you. Boots sounded on the stairs. Silas appeared in his doorway, snow on his coat shoulders, hat in hand. Ma said you were leaving. Ruth couldn't meet his eyes. I'm causing trouble for everyone. You're causing trouble for Thorne. That's different. He stepped into the room, hesitated, then sat in the single chair by the window. I got a proposal, not the kind you're thinking, necessarily, or maybe it is. I ain't good with words. Esther stood. I'll be downstairs. Ma, you two need to talk plain. Can't do that with me hovering. She left, closing the door most of the way. Proper. Silas turned his hat in his hands, cleared his throat. The marshal's complaint is about moral impropriety. Single woman, unmarried man, same household. If we were married, complaint goes away. Boarding house reputation protected. And your residency continues unbroken. Ruth's chest tightened. You're proposing marriage of convenience. I'm proposing marriage. He met her eyes. Convenience would be letting Thorne win. This is something else. I won't trap you in a false marriage for my legal benefit. Who said false? His voice was rough. Ruth, for 3 years, I've been dead inside. Ever since he stopped, started again. House feels alive with you in it. Ma laughs again. I remember what it's like to care about something beyond the next freight load. You feel guilty. That's all. Guilty you can help and I can't refuse. Maybe I spent 3 months' wages buying back your mother's ring because I'm thinking long-term. Silence. The dripping from the eaves continued, steady, relentless. Ruth's voice came out barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me you'd bought it? Some things a man does because they're right. Not for credit. Silas set his hat on the floor, leaned forward, elbows on knees. I ain't asking you to love me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm asking you to let me stand with you, legal and proper. So when we face Thorne, we face him together. Ruth looked at him, really looked. Weathered face, honest eyes, hands scarred from freight work and ranch labor. A good man. Maybe even a man she could... No, not yet. Too much chaos, too much need. She couldn't think clearly about feelings when survival was still uncertain. If we marry for legal convenience, she said slowly, and feelings don't follow, then we'll sort that when we get there. But right now, you need legal standing. I can give you that. Question is whether you trust me enough to take it. I trust you. The words came easier than she expected. But Silas even married, we still can't prove Thorne forged the deed. The marshals bought, the telegraph's blocked. What changes? Time changes. We get you to 90 days, you've got legal claim no matter what Thorne says. And he pulled a folded paper from his coat. Judge Harlan Webb rides circuit through here, federal appointee, due in Thornton April 10th. That's 76 days from now. Silas unfolded the paper. A printed schedule. Judge hears land disputes, fraud cases, territorial business. Can't be bought by railroad money. Been riding these territories 30 years. Hates land theft like sin. Ruth stared at the date. April 10th. A deadline. A target. If we can build a case by then, she started. We'll need more than 4 manifests and a forged signature. We'll need a pattern. Proof it's systematic. Silas's jaw set. I got 2 years of freight records. Let me dig deeper. Find every lost trunk, every single woman, every homestead claim that changed hands suspicious. That could take weeks. We got 76 days. I'll use them. Footsteps on the stairs. Esther appeared with a coffee pot and 3 cups. Set them on the washstand without asking permission. You two sorted feelings yet? Or you still dancing around what needs saying? Ruth almost laughed. Almost. We're discussing strategy. Strategy. Esther poured coffee. That what young people call it now? Silas took a cup. Ma, we need evidence. Pattern evidence. Something that shows Thorne's been doing this for years. Then get it. Esther handed Ruth a cup. But do it smart. Don't let Thorne know you're looking until you're ready to show the judge. She looked between them. 76 days. That's February, March, and most of April. Winter to spring. Ice to mud to green grass. Long enough to build a case. Long enough to decide what kind of future you're building. Her eyes settled on Ruth. Question is, you got the spine to stay? Ruth thought of the depot platform, the empty road, $3.47, how close she'd come to freezing to death on Christmas Eve because no one would help. And then someone did. She set down her coffee, unpacked her carpet bag, hung the dresses back in the wardrobe. I'm staying. Silas exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. Then we fight. February arrived with false spring. The sun climbed higher. Snow melted into mud that sucked at boots and turned Main Street into a brown river. Icicles dripped from every eave. The sound of water was everywhere. Silas spent his evenings in the boarding house parlor. Freight manifests spread across every surface. Ruth sat beside him, cross-referencing dates with land office records Reverend Knox had quietly borrowed. They worked in silence mostly. Comfortable silence. The kind that comes when 2 people are pulling the same weight. Esther brought coffee and stayed to help. She had a mind for patterns, for seeing what connected. Here, she said one evening, tapping a manifest. February 1886, trunk belonging to Sarah Finch, marked water-damaged, contents destroyed. But look, she pulled a land record. Sarah Finch filed a claim March 1885, quarter section east of town. Transferred to Robert Ames 6 weeks after the trunk was lost. Silas wrote it down. That made 7. 7 women, 7 lost trunks, 7 transferred homesteads. Not enough. Still not enough. Ruth barely saw Silas outside those evening sessions. He hauled freight during the day, worked his ranch before dawn, spent nights hunting through 2 years of paper. But one afternoon in mid-February, he appeared at the boarding house while Ruth was teaching, stood in the doorway until the lesson finished. The children gathered their slates and left, chattering about spring and mud and whether the creek was high enough for fishing yet. Ruth wiped the chalkboard clean. Did you find something? No, I came to talk. The way he said it made Ruth set down the cloth, turned to face him fully. Silas closed the parlor door. Not all the way, proper, but enough for privacy. We've been working side by side for 3 weeks, he said. Sorting papers, building a case. But we ain't talked about the other thing. What other thing? Marriage. Ruth's throat went tight. Silas? I know you said you won't trap me. I know you think I'm offering out of guilt or duty or Christian charity. But Ruth, he stepped closer. Not crowding. Just close enough she could smell the cold air on his coat, the scent of horses and leather and honest work. I need you to hear me plain. I'm listening. I was married before. Emily. Good woman. Gentle. We were happy. His voice roughened. She died 3 years ago. Childbirth. Baby too. I buried them both on the ranch, and then I buried myself in work. Didn't laugh. Didn't talk more than necessary. Didn't feel much of anything. Ruth had guessed some of this. Hearing it spoken made it real. Ma kept trying to pull me back to living. Church ladies brought casseroles and sympathy. But nobody... He stopped, started again. Nobody let me just be broken for a while. They wanted me fixed, remarried, back to normal. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you so you understand. He met her eyes. You walked into that kitchen on Christmas Eve and made coffee without asking permission. You reorganized Ma's library like you belonged here. You taught those children because that's who you are, not because anyone asked. And Ruth, the house sounds alive again. The clock ticked. Outside, a wagon passed, wheels squelching through mud. I ain't asking you to love me, Silas continued. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I ain't offering marriage out of guilt. I'm offering because for the first time in 3 years I want to. Because you make me remember what it's like to care about tomorrow. Ruth's hands twisted together. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken from... Then we'll be broken together. His voice was steady. Certain. Question is whether you trust me enough to try. The words hung between them. Ruth looked at this man who'd stopped when others rode past, who'd paid 3 months' wages for a ring he might never have reason to return, who sat up nights sorting papers so she could have justice. I trust you. The truth of it surprised her. But, Silas, I can't think clearly about feelings when I'm still fighting for survival. It's not fair to either of us. Fair? He almost smiled. Nothing about this is fair. You got robbed. I'm offering help. If feelings come later, we'll call it a gift. If they don't, he shrugged. We'll have each other's backs anyway. That's marriage, too, the staying kind. Ruth's throat burned. She wanted to say yes, wanted to fall into the safety he offered, but something in her balked. Pride, maybe. Or fear. Or the knowledge that accepting rescue meant admitting how desperate she truly was. Ask me again, she whispered. After we have the evidence. After we know if we can win. Ask me then. Silas nodded slowly. All right, but Ruth... He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small cloth bundle, set it on the table between them. She didn't need to unwrap it. She knew. You bought back my mother's ring. January 10th, right after you sold it. He pushed the bundle toward her. Figured you'd want it someday. For remembering. Or for wearing, whichever. How much did it cost? Don't matter. Silas. $15, 3 months' freight wages. And the number hit her like a fist. 3 months. He'd worked 3 months of cold mornings and heavy loads to buy back a ring he had no guarantee she'd ever accept from him. Why? Because some things are worth keeping safe. Because your mama wore it through hard times and good. Because he stopped, met her eyes. Because when you're ready, I want to be able to put it back where it belongs. Ruth picked up the bundle, felt the weight of silver and love in years. Her mother's hand had worn this ring. Her father had placed it there 40 years ago. Now it sat in Ruth's palm, rescued from pawn shops and strangers' fingers by a man who'd loved his wife and buried her and somehow found room to care again. Thank you, her voice broke, for keeping it safe. Always will. Silas stepped back, gave her space. Now I got manifests to sort. You coming? Yes. They worked until midnight that night, and when Ruth finally climbed to her room, she set her mother's ring on the nightstand where she could see it, not wearing it, not yet, but keeping it close. The breakthrough came February 28th. Silas arrived at supper with a face like thunder, threw a stack of manifests on the kitchen table, hard enough to rattle the dishes. 14, and his voice was tight, controlled, barely. 14 women in 2 years, 14 lost trunks, 14 homestead claims transferred to fake names within 6 months. He spread the papers like cards. Ruth and Esther leaned close. Look at the pattern. Every trunk delivered, every one signed for by Thorne, then marked lost or damaged a week later. Every claimant single. Every transfer notarized by the same clerk, Samuel Webb and Helena, Thorne's brother-in-law. Reverend Knox had joined them for supper. Now he studied the manifest with sharp eyes. This isn't just theft. This is federal mail fraud. Systematic, premeditated. 5-year prison sentence if convicted. But who'll convict him? Ruth's old despair crept back. The marshals bought, the telegraphs controlled. Judge Harlan Webb. Knox tapped the calendar. Circuit judge. Federal appointee. Due here April 10th. Been riding these territories 30 years. Hates land fraud worse than anything. Esther pulled out her ledger. Ruth's got 61 days of documented residency. 29 days till the judge arrives. If she stays, she'll have 90 days exactly. Legal standing no one can dismiss. If Thorne doesn't know we're building a case. Silas gathered the manifests carefully. If he finds out, he'll destroy records, bribe the judge, make evidence disappear. Then we work quiet. Ruth's voice was steady now, certain. We find the other women, get their stories, build a case so tight even Thorne can't wiggle out. Knox nodded. I'll reach out through church networks, quietly, see if any of the 14 are still in the territory. Their testimony would... A knock at the door cut him off. Everyone froze. Esther stood, smoothed her apron, answered. Marshal Creedy stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Evening, Mrs. Cormack. Got a message for Miss Mercer. Ruth appeared in the doorway. Yes. Mr. Thorne asked me to inform you. He cleared his throat. Judge Webb's circuit's been delayed. Spring flooding. Won't make it through here till late May now. Maybe June. The words hit like a physical blow. June. 2 more months, 60 more days of surviving, hiding, pretending everything was fine, while Thorne controlled every lever of power. Creddy tipped his hat. Sorry to bring bad news, miss, but thought you'd want to know. He left. Ruth stood in the doorway, cold air flowing past her into the warm kitchen. Behind her, she heard Silas swear quietly. Esther's sharp intake of breath. Reverend Knox spoke first. He's lying. I'll wire the territorial court myself. Verify. How? Ruth turned. Through Thorne's telegraph? The trap closed tighter. Even seeking truth meant asking permission from the man who dealt in lies. Ruth looked at the calendar, looked at the manifests spread across the table. 14 women, 14 stolen lives, and somewhere in Helena, a judge who might or might not be delayed, a deadline that might or might not exist, truth that might or might not matter. Spring was coming. The mud proved it, the dripping eaves, the higher sun, the robins that had started singing at dawn. But spring might not come fast enough. March arrived with the last hard freeze. Ice locked everything one final time before spring could win. Reverend Knox confirmed the truth through a traveling merchant. Judge Webb's circuit wasn't delayed. Still scheduled for April 10th. Thorne's message had been a lie, testing them, seeing if they'd give up. They didn't. Silas worked the freight yard during the day, sorted manifests at night. Ruth continued teaching the few children whose parents hadn't withdrawn them. Esther kept her ledger, marking each day Ruth stayed in room 3. 65 days, 70, 75. Then March 28th, everything changed. Silas came to the boarding house after dark. His face was gray, hands shaking slightly as he set his hat on the table. He knows. His voice was flat. Thorne knows we're building a case. Ruth's stomach dropped. How? Doesn't matter. He knows. Silas sat heavily. Came to me at the freight yard this afternoon. Private. Just the two of us. Esther poured coffee nobody would drink, sat down. What did he offer? $500? Cash, plus guaranteed freight contracts for 5 years. Railroad business, steady income. More than I've ever made. The number hung in the air, $500. A fortune. Security, safety. In exchange for, Ruth already knew, destroy the manifests, forget what I found. Tell the judge, if he asks, that I made a mistake. Mixed up records, no pattern, no theft. Silence. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, ice cracked on the eaves as temperatures rose. That's 5 years' wages, Silas said quietly. Maybe more. I could pay off the ranch, build a real house, have something solid. And, Esther's voice was sharp, what did you tell him? I said I'd think about it. Ruth's hands went cold. She looked at Silas, really looked, and saw the exhaustion there. 3 months of fighting. 3 months of standing between her and Thorne's power. For what? A woman he barely knew. A case he might lose. Justice that might never come. You should take it. The words came out before she could stop them. Silas's head snapped up. What? You should take the money. Ruth's voice stayed steady. Barely. You've done enough. More than enough. But Thorne's right. He's railroad, you're labor. The judge might not believe you anyway. Why lose everything for a fight you can't win? Ruth, I mean it. She stood, paced to the window, looked out at darkness and mud and the last ice of winter. You've got a ranch, a life, a future. Don't throw it away for me. For you, Silas stood too. You think this is about you? Isn't it? No. His voice went hard. It's about 14 women. 14 families robbed blind by a man who thinks power makes him untouchable. It's about whether law means anything or whether money always wins. He crossed to the table, spread his hands on the wood, leaned forward. It's about who I want to be when I look in the mirror. And Ruth, if I take that money, if I let Thorne buy my silence, I become him. I become the kind of man who lets injustice slide because it's profitable. But what if we lose anyway? Then we lose clean. Silas straightened. I'd rather lose with my soul intact than win by selling it for $500. Esther had been quiet. Now she spoke. What's your soul worth, boy? More than that. Silas looked at Ruth. She asked me if I trusted her. Now I'm asking, do you trust me? To see this through, to stand when it costs something. Ruth saw him then, really saw him. Not as her rescuer or her ally or even her future husband, but as a man making the same choice she'd made on Christmas Eve. The choice to stay when running was easier, to fight when surrender was safer. I trust you. Her voice broke. God help me. I trust you. Then we fight. Silas gathered the manifests, stacked them carefully. Thorne can offer all the money in Montana, won't change what's right. They spent the next 10 days preparing like soldiers before battle. Esther compiled the ledger evidence, 91 consecutive days by April 10th. Every meal, every night, every task, dated and detailed. Silas organized the manifests chronologically. 14 women, 14 trunks, 14 thefts. The pattern clear as daylight. Reverend Knox located 3 of the 14 defrauded women, wrote letters, got responses, affidavits sworn before mining camp magistrates, women willing to testify by proxy even if they couldn't come in person. Ruth practiced her testimony, the facts of her case, the forged signature, the stolen ring, the conspiracy. She rehearsed until the words came automatic, until she could say them without crying. Word spread through town. The boarding house became 2 camps. Working families, freight handlers, laundresses, carpenters stopped by to offer quiet support. Merchants and railroad men stayed away, loyal to Thorne or afraid of him. April 9th arrived cold. Sleet fell. Roads turned to frozen mud. Thorne stood on the depot platform, watching the empty road from Helena. Smiled when the judge's wagon didn't appear. Storm's bad north of here, he told anyone who'd listen. Judge might not make it. Shame folks prepared all that for nothing. Ruth spent that night awake, watching from her window as sleet rattled the glass, wondering if justice would arrive or if winter would win one last time. Dawn broke cold and clear. A wagon appeared on the north road. Single horse, weathered canvas cover, moving steady through mud. It pulled up to the boarding house just after sunrise. An old man climbed down, 70, maybe older, weathered face carved by decades of sun and wind, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a judge's black coat dusted with road mud. Esther met him at the door. Judge Webb? Yes, ma'am. Hear you folks got business needs settling. Behind him, Virgil Thorne emerged from the depot. Saw the wagon, saw the judge. His smile died. Justice had arrived, and there was nowhere left to run. The boarding house parlor filled before 8 o'clock. 40 people crammed into a space meant for 15. They stood against walls, sat on the stairs, pressed into the hallway. Half the town came to watch. Judge Webb took Esther's wingback chair, made it a bench with nothing but his presence, set his leather case on the side table, pulled out spectacles, surveyed the room. This is irregular, he said. But I hear there's disputes need settling, fraud claims, land transfers, federal matters. His eyes found Thorne. Mr. Thorne, you're named in the complaint. You represented? Thorne stood near the door. He'd brought a lawyer from Helena, clean-shaven man, in a good suit, carrying files thick with paper. Yes, Your Honor, these accusations are baseless. Miss Mercer is a disappointed woman making wild claims. I'll hear evidence first, opinions after. Webb gestured to Ruth. Miss Mercer, present your case. Ruth stood. Her hands wanted to shake. She forced them still. Your Honor, my mother filed a homestead claim in 1885, quarter section north of town. She died August 1887. I came west in December with the deed in my trunk. That trunk was delivered to Thornton Depot, signed for by Mr. Thorne, then reported lost. 3 weeks later, the claim was transferred, using a forged signature, to a man named Thomas Hadley, Mr. Thorne's nephew. The lawyer objected. Speculation, no proof of forgery. I have proof. Ruth nodded to Esther. Esther stood, carried her ledger like it was gospel, set it in front of the judge. This is my boarding house record. Shows Miss Mercer arrived December 24th, has resided in room 3 every night since. 91 consecutive days of documented residency. Judge Webb opened the ledger, read slowly. His finger traced down the pages. Every dated entry, every meal served, every task completed. Mrs. Cormack, you keep detailed records. My daughter taught me, Your Honor. She said truth lives in details. Your daughter was wise. And he looked at the lawyer. You contesting this residency documentation? The residency isn't the issue. It establishes standing. Miss Mercer has legal right to contest the claim transfer. Webb turned to Silas. Mr. Cormack, you're listed as witness. What evidence do you bring? Silas stood. Spread 14 freight manifests across the table in front of the judge. I'm a freight contractor for the railroad. Keep carbon copies of every delivery. Regulation requires it. These manifests show a pattern over 2 years. 14 trunks belonging to single women, all marked delivered and signed for by Mr. Thorne. All later reported lost or damaged. All 14 women had filed homestead claims. All 14 claims transferred to new owners within 6 months. The room went dead quiet. You could hear breathing, nothing else. Judge Webb examined each manifest. cross-referenced names with the land records Knox had provided. His face stayed neutral, but his jaw tightened. 14 women. His voice was soft, dangerous. 14 lost trunks, 14 transferred claims. Thorne's lawyer shifted. Coincidence. Frontier conditions are harsh. Loss is common. Not this common. Webb looked at Reverend Knox. You have affidavits? Knox stood. 3 of the 14 women, Your Honor, working in mining camps now. They swore statements before local magistrates. All tell the same story. Arrived in Thornton, trunks lost, claims transferred through signatures they never made. He handed the papers to Webb. The judge read them. When he looked up, his eyes had gone cold. Mr. Thorne stepped forward. Thorne came to the center of the room. His confidence had cracked around the edges, but he kept his voice steady. Your Honor, I run a busy depot. Mistakes happen, but systematic fraud? That's a serious accusation. It is. Webb pulled out the forged deed transfer, the one with Martha Mercer's supposed signature. Miss Mercer claims this signature is forged, that her mother died in August before this October date. Can you verify this signature's authenticity? The notary verified it? The notary is your brother-in-law and Helena. Webb's voice went flat. I'm asking you directly. Did Martha Mercer sign this deed transfer? To my knowledge, yes. To your knowledge? Webb set the deed aside. Pulled Ruth's mother's Bible from the evidence pile. This Bible contains Martha Mercer's handwriting. Family records, dated 1862 through 1887. Her final entry was made July of last year. Weeks before her death, he opened the Bible, showed the page to Thorne. Compare this handwriting to the deed signature. Tell me they match. Thorne looked, said nothing. They don't match, Webb said quietly. Any fool can see it. The deed signature is masculine. Heavy pressure, different slant. This is forgery, Mr. Thorne. I didn't forge it. Thomas Hadley brought me that paperwork. Then let's establish the truth. Webb pulled out a blank sheet, set a pen beside it. Write your full name and address right now. Thorne's face went gray. Your Honor, that's a direct order. Right. The room held its breath. Thorne picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly. He wrote, Virgil Thorne, Depot Master, Thornton, Montana Territory. Webb held the paper up to lamplight, then held the forged deed beside it. The handwriting matched exactly. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts. Someone swore. Thorne's lawyer grabbed for the papers, but Webb pulled them back. Marshal Creedy. Webb's voice cut through the chaos. Arrest this man. Creedy stood frozen by the door. Your Honor, You're a territorial marshal. I'm a federal judge. Arrest Mr. Thorne for mail fraud, theft of postal materials, and conspiracy to defraud homestead claimants. Federal crimes. 5-year sentence minimum. Creedy looked at Thorne, looked at the judge, chose survival. He pulled handcuffs from his belt, crossed the room. Virgil Thorne, you're under arrest. The cuffs clicked shut. Thorne's last words came out quiet, bitter. You people got no idea what you've cost this town. Ruth stood, found her voice. We cost it nothing but a thief. Judge Webb nodded. Court rules in favor of Miss Mercer. The forged deed transfer is voided. Martha Mercer's original homestead claim is restored to her legal heir, Ruth Mercer. Residency requirements satisfied via 91 days of documented boarding house residence. Quarter section officially deeded. He signed the order, stamped it, handed it to Ruth. Miss Mercer, you've got land, legal and clear. Ruth took the paper, her mother's claim, her mother's legacy, saved. Outside, a robin sang. First warm wind of spring rattled the windows. Winter was finally over. The crowd dispersed slowly. Some stayed to shake Ruth's hand. Others avoided eye contact, embarrassed they'd sided with Thorne. A few merchants looked worried. What would happen to freight now? Who'd run the depot? Judge Webb stayed an hour, filing paperwork. He called Ruth over before leaving. Miss Mercer, your mother's claim is valued at $200 official. With improvements and filed status, it's worth closer to $800 now. You understand what that means? I have land, Your Honor. You have more than land. You have legal standing, property, independence. He adjusted his spectacles. What will you do with it? Ruth looked at Silas, standing by the window, hat in hands, watching her with something like hope. Build something, she said quietly. Something worth keeping. Webb nodded, packed his case. I'll notify the other 13 women. They can file claims now that Thorne's arrested. Might take years to sort it all, but justice rarely runs fast. He paused at the door. Mrs. Cormack, your ledger saved this case. Without that documentation, Miss Mercer had no standing. Details matter. Your daughter taught you well. Esther's eyes shone. Yes, sir, she did. That evening, the boarding house was quiet. Just the 3 of them. Esther at the stove, making supper nobody was hungry for. Ruth at the table, staring at the deed with her name on it. Silas by the fire, not reading the book in his hands. Finally, Esther set down her spoon. You two are dancing around something again. Either say it or stop wasting my time. Silas set the book aside, crossed to the table, knelt beside Ruth's chair. You told me to ask again, after we won, after we had evidence, after we knew. His voice was steady. Certain. We won, I'm asking. Ruth's breath caught. Ruth Mercer, will you marry me? Not for convenience, not for legal standing, not because you need rescue. He pulled the small cloth bundle from his pocket, unwrapped it. The silver ring caught lamplight. Because you're the strongest person I know. Because you taught me that courage isn't fearless, it's staying when you're terrified. Because I want to build a life with you, on that quarter section. Plant apple trees, raise children, grow old arguing about books. He held out the ring. Will you marry me? Ruth looked at the ring, her mother's ring. Worn through 40 years of marriage and poverty and frontier hardship, sold in desperation, bought back by a man who understood what it meant to lose everything and choose to love anyway. Yes. The word came out steady. Sure. Yes, Silas Cormack. I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, always had. Esther turned from the stove, wiping her eyes with her apron. About time. Now wash up, supper's ready. They married 2 weeks later. April 25th, the earth had thawed completely. Robins sang from every cottonwood. Mud had dried to dust on the roads. Reverend Knockhorn performed the ceremony in the boarding house parlor, same room where the trial had happened. Same chair Judge Webb had used, now decorated with wildflowers the children had picked. Ruth wore her navy dress. Silas wore his Sunday suit. Esther stood as witness, the leather ledger tucked under her arm like she couldn't bear to be parted from it. The vows were simple, traditional. But when Silas spoke his promises, his voice carried weight. I promise shelter that becomes home. I promise mercy that becomes love. I promise to choose you every day, Ruth, until my last breath. Ruth answered in kind. I promise gratitude that becomes partnership. I promise courage that becomes trust. I promise to choose you every day, Silas, and to make this life beautiful. Knox pronounced them married. Silas kissed her, gentle, reverent, full of promise. Outside, spring had won completely. The creek ran high with snowmelt. Prairie flowers bloomed in yellow and purple waves. The air smelled of warm earth and new grass and possibilities. That afternoon, Ruth and Silas walked to her land, their land now. It stretched under April sun, 160 acres of prairie grass and possibility. A small creek ran through the northeast corner, good soil, protected from wind by a low ridge. Ruth knelt, pressed her hands into the earth, still cool from winter but warming, alive. Mama, she whispered. We kept it. We kept your land. Silas knelt beside her. What should we plant first? Apple trees. Ruth looked at him. For shade. For fruit. For watching grow. How many? 6. 1 for each month we fought. He smiled. 6 apple trees. In a house. In a barn. And maybe... He stopped. What? Maybe a cradle. Someday. When you're ready. Ruth pressed her hand to her stomach. Not yet. But someday. Life continuing. Roots going down. Someday, she agreed. They stood together, walked the land edge to edge, marked where the house would go, where the barn, where the garden. The sun dropped toward the mountains. Gold light flooded the valley. Meadowlarks called from the grass. Ruth turned back toward the boarding house. Smoke rose from Esther's chimney, steady, welcoming. She'd arrived in winter with $3.47, arrived broken and desperate and ready to give up. Now she stood on her own land, married to a good man, with a future she'd fought for and won. Ready to go home? Silas asked. Ruth looked at the boarding house, looked at the land, looked at her husband. I am home. Spring came to Montana that year like Mercy, late, hard-won, and worth the wait. Ruth Mercer Cormack stood on her porch 6 months later, hand resting on her belly where new life grew. October evening, harvest light flooding the valley gold. The apple trees they'd planted in April had taken root. Small yet, but alive, growing. Behind her, the house Silas had built. 2 rooms now, more to come, solid, home. In her other hand, she held Esther's ledger. The old woman had given it to her at summer's end. You'll need to keep your own records now. Land, crops, children someday. Write it all down. Truth lives in details. Ruth opened to the first entry, December 24th, 1887, R. Mercer, room 3, 12-hour month boarding. Credit extended 30 days, 1 line, 1 act of mercy. Everything had grown from that. She thought about the depot platform, how close she'd come to freezing, how easily she could have died nameless and forgotten in the Montana cold. But someone stopped. Someone chose mercy over convenience. Someone kept records when truth needed testimony. Ruth had learned something her mother knew: that land remembers who fights for it. That law, applied justly, is the difference between civilization and chaos. That one ledger entry can change a life. That courage is just truth spoken out loud. Silas appeared from the barn, tools over his shoulder, work done for the day. He saw her standing there with the ledger and smiled. Writing something? Remembering. She closed the book, counting blessings. He climbed the porch steps, kissed her forehead. Together, they watched the sun set over land they'd fought for and won. Somewhere in Helena, Thorne sat in a federal prison. The other 13 women had filed claims. Most won. Justice moved slow, but it moved. And on 160 acres north of Thornton, apple trees grew from spring planting. Their roots ran deep in soil bought with courage and won with ink. Ruth touched her mother's ring, touched her belly, touched the ledger. Some things are worth staying for. Some fights are worth fighting. And sometimes, when winter's coldest, salvation arrives not as rescue, but as witness. Someone who stays when others ride past, who keeps record when truth needs testimony, who believes that mercy and law together build something stronger than either one alone. The land stretched green into evening. The house stood solid. And Ruth Mercer Cormack, who'd arrived with nothing, had everything that mattered: home.